Okay, good evening, coaches. Welcome to the Hills Football webinar series again. This episode is about the player development journey and developing a holistic player. Really grateful for everyone for jumping on, particularly during a training week with possibility of some wet weather on the weekend. So a good opportunity for you all to be able to get out on the park probably a little bit ahead of a wet weekend. But I'm here tonight joined with two fantastic coaches that I've known for a little bit of time. We've got Adrian Jennings, you'll see there as AJ. AJ is the current technical director at Norwest Football Club, so one of our local member clubs in the area. Currently a C license coach. We've also accredited coach educator as well, so delivers a Miniru certificate only a couple of weeks ago down at Francesco there as well. Delivers one pretty much every year, so fantastic coach there. AJ, welcome. If you want to say a couple things about yourself and your coaching background for the viewers.
Yeah, good evening. I took up coaching quite early. I think I received my first coaching badge when I was about 14. That was part of making a stateside. You sort of go in and made to do a coaching course. I think back then it was, I think they called it level 1. So it's going back quite a few years. I've coached basically everywhere in terms of SAP, youth, first grade, NPL. Now down in association football with Norwest. I've got 4 kids that are down in that area. So just helping out there while my kids are there so I can spend extra time with them.
You've got 4 of them. That's
4.
Doesn't mean you coach 4 teams.
Well, one does the Cubs program 3 to 5s, and then I've got one in the 7s, one in the 10s, one in the 12s. But there's people that sort of help around, which is nice because you can't really cover all 4 age groups there. So
yeah, the whole club has to do their training schedule around what AJ's kids are doing on a week.
That's right.
Well, at least you get to create the training schedule, right? So you can put your
teams on whatever. Block out half a field.
I'm also joined with Matt Licata. Matt, I've also known for a couple of years. He is a Sydney sider that has coached it over in Sydney NPL and bits and pieces, but is now living the dream over in professional football lands. So Matt's made the journey over to the UK and currently working for Millwall. What's your role at Millwall for everyone there, Matt?
So I'm the safeguarding and player care officer in the academy. So working across the under 9s up to the 23s. On a full-time basis. It's been quite insightful to see the academy across those age groups.
So what does your role entail for that?
It's basically working really closely with all the club stakeholders to ensure safety of the children, good practice of coaches in terms of safeguarding, and looking at sort of holistic player care development from all angles outside of coaching, which is nice.
Do you manage to still get in the park and deliver some sessions yourself?
I can, but just because I'm new to the role at the moment, just been a couple of months in, I'm still a little bit more focused on the safeguarding aspect. But there may be some of those opportunities. I'm looking to do my UEFA C with our under 18s, which is part of their education program, and there is a coaching component to that as well. So that might be a good opportunity to do a little bit of that.
And what's your Australian license? Is that a B license?
So I've completed the coursework for my AFCB, but I need to submit my assessment. So I was fortunate that I videoed that before I left, but I need to put that together and hopefully pass.
Yeah, get that in sooner rather than later, so you've at least ticked the box. All right, so got a couple of questions for you before we get into the content of the session. So, what's your favorite team yourselves?
I'm Manchester United, unfortunately.
Mine's Liverpool.
Ooh, two Reds there. For a long period of the season, my only joy was how bad Man United was doing. That was my high point until it turned around. Mine and Watford and Newcastle. So I had both at one stage, both of them in a relegation zone. So I wasn't looking too friendly. Favorite player, past and current. Matt, you can go first on this one.
Past would be Gianluigi Buffon. I think we haven't seen a goalkeeper of his caliber in a while, or something like him. And current, I'm going to go with a Liverpool player, Salah.
Goalkeeper and striker.
Mine would be Paul Scholes. And currently, probably pains me to say a little bit too, there's two blokes at Manchester City, actually, Phil Foden and Kevin De Bruyne.
You like your centre midfielders? I
do.
Yeah, De Bruyne is probably my current favourite, but my past would be Big Alan Shearer. I don't think you can go much better than that one. Favourite boots, AJ? What if you could wear any boots? What would you be wearing?
Some Lotto Stadios, but anything that's black, I do not like colour.
Lotto, I wouldn't expect that one. Matt?
Mine's the Nike Mercurial Vapors. Just found them to be a really good, sturdy boot.
Aren't they the lightest of them? The first ones that come out that were super light.
Yeah, I think there's so many models that have come out, but I think more their models around five years ago, a little bit more sturdier, a little bit after that.
Favorite coach, Matt, you can go first on this one for past and current.
Past, I'd say Arsene Wenger, just because of his revolution of style of football at the time with Arsenal and Barcelona. I think now it's sort of quite common, that style of play universally, but as it was emergent, I think Wenger was a really key player in that. And current, I think a new evolution of that is Klopp's style of play, which has a little bit more to it with pressing component. So those would be my two.
Okay.
Yeah, might surprise people, but it's not Alex Ferguson, even though he had great success at the club that I liked. But I tend to follow quite a few coaches. Some of the sort of the older ones like Bill. So I like the fact that the way he plays, but I also like the fact that he'll pick a project rather than go somewhere with a lot of money where you're backed with resources and things like that. But I like Guardiola. Pains me to say again, I love Klopp. Even the other German bloke, Hansi Flick. So there's just quite a few that I sort of take bits and pieces from that I enjoy. They're all slightly different in their own little way. But yeah.
I think probably the current one we've missed out there is Mr. Ange.
Yes.
Be interesting to see if he gets a call up to go into the big league.
I hope so.
So, worst football injury you've seen on a field? Hopefully that hasn't actually happened, but what's the most gruesome sort of thing you've seen?
For me, it has to be the Peter Cech injury to the skull. It's obviously changed Cech for his playing career after that, but that was quite a brutal injury, I think, and consider that he was doing everything technically right by the looks of it, diving on the ball, and just one of those really, really ugly incidents.
Yeah, was that one that Jabril Cisse had were basically the bottom half of his leg went all floppy. I've actually seen that in a game, just in an association level, and it's disgusting to say the least.
I think the worst I've seen from a coaching point of view was the last game of the season. Last time I was coaching Hills United first grade, gave a young boy, one of the 20s, his debut in first grade. And as he's literally run on the field first tackle, the first grader that he's going up against has kind of dropped his shoulder, and they've just gone straight in, and the shoulder's got him in the jaw and knocked his front 4 teeth back. And I've kind of run, and the physio's run on, and I've grabbed in and I've gone to him like, "You okay, Frankie?" And he's like, holding it out, not really want to talk. You can just see 4 teeth facing the wrong way. It was kind of like you imagine with a shark with their teeth in different places throughout. That one was not pretty at all. Like, yep, you're coming off. So thank you for that. That's obviously some different perspective, and we'll see hopefully not too many Man United players come up through conversation, AJ.
Hopefully.
Not
the current ones anyway. Yeah.
So straight into it. What's the player pathway to the top, sort of as you see it, AJ? If you're looking for silver bullet, you've got this parent that wants their kid to be number one, wants to become the next Socceroo or Matilda. How would you see, from your perspective, how would they get to the top? What do they need to do? Where do they need to go?
Depending on the age. I mean, depends how old the kid is. Like, a lot of people say you got to go through SAP, you got to go through youth league, but there's a lot of people that don't go through SAP. They come into youth league late. They might be late bloomers. I tell a lot of kids and their parents, don't necessarily just pick the club out of name. I said you've got to try and find out more a bit about what the club's like, the coaching staff. Do they continually retain a good percentage of their kids throughout the SAP and the youth league ages, so that you can progress through that, or whether or not it's just, they just pick kids for the sake of picking kids. So basically, like, pick good coaches before you pick a club, because particularly in the younger age groups, it is about your development rather about winning. Like, I'm pretty sure Graham Arnold hasn't picked, players that are in the Socceroos because they won the under-9 SAP 15 years ago. He couldn't care less. So if you're looking for development, take a little bit of a backward step. And yes, some of the bigger clubs and more well-known clubs have the resources, but find out what they're about. Do they retain kids? Do they promote kids? Like, do they have a lot of younger kids in first grade, for instance, or are they sort of 28, 29-year-olds and they don't give young people a shot? Because you need exposure if you want to get into A-League teams and so forth, and can't get exposure if your club's not willing to give it to you.
So Matt, obviously you have a slightly different point of view now, being overseas, but how do you see the player pathway differing from the UK and what we possibly have in New South Wales?
I think opportunity is the key word. Obviously, that there's a lot more investment over here, so there's a lot more clubs, there's a lot more support staff in academies and professional standards, so that definitely helps the development of players. I think the same sort of structures in terms of the phases exist. It's just sort of the approach and the supports within them that differs, obviously. But there's no sort of one size fits all to any player to make it to the top. They've all got their own journeys and they all sort of develop at different stages. But if there's a player that's ahead of their journey comparatively to many others in their age group, they'd be given opportunities to play in a higher age group quite readily. Whether that be a 16-year-old, for example, debut in the first team, which happened this season at Millwall, which is quite incredible. But I don't think it's an isolated story. and certainly see a lot of situations where you've got younger players playing 2-3 age groups up. So I think that opportunity is key. And then I think, like AJ touched on, being in the right environment with the right coaches that focus on the key development aspects that are needed for individual players to then get to that level.
I know the very interesting there about players playing up a grade or 2 or 3, because I've been involved in a number of conversations those in the past. How do they possibly do that over there with the other players currently in the squad? Because there's always a concern in most of the conversations I've been involved in. Yeah, the kid's good enough to go up, but we still need to be fair and reasonable to the players we have signed in that older age group and don't detriment their game time too much just because someone else can get minutes in their own grade as well.
Yeah, totally. I think it's obviously a little bit different for first teams and under 23s in the UK, where those are professional squads. But when it comes to sort of development, it does come down to opportunity again. It comes down to sort of squad sizes, injuries, suspensions as well, which is just a natural part of it. But there's in academies, there's some academies that will take a lot of players, which does limit that opportunity to play up, and then other academies that will take fewer players here, which, you know, to give that opportunity for players to step up.
I guess that comes back to what AJ said there about the environment as well. Find out what works for you. What in your opinion, AJ, does a player need in order to make it to the top? And obviously, you can say the fitness and the skill level and everything. But what's probably, if you were to say to one thing, sets a top player apart and sends them away from the levels that you see, what typically would that be?
Yeah, obviously, apart from having the technical and tactical ability, it's attitude and hard work. If you're not willing to put in the hours and train by yourself, do things by yourself, you simply won't go anywhere. There's a reason why those top players are the best, because they train the hardest and they train the most. You know, you hear stories all the time that, you know, Ronaldo's first in, last out. Well, there's a reason why he was player of the year for the, you know, one of the top 2 players for the last 15 years is because he works harder than everybody else. And I had one coach say to me one time that if a player always thinks that somebody else is out there training while you're sitting around doing nothing, well, they're obviously going to get better than you. So hard work and attitude.
Matt, is there anything you see different potentially from the best players over there?
I think it's really similar to AJ. I think there's a massive emphasis on technical and tactical development for players, but there are also other aspects of development and social and psychological development. And the players that appear to be really good in all of those areas seem to be the ones that succeed. And so for me, it comes down to a couple of key qualities. One, being a good decision maker, and 2, having a top attitude. And I think those are the players that you hear a lot of stories here of guys like Declan Rice, for example, at West Ham. You know, he wasn't offered he was 50-50 about getting offered a scholarship when he was 16, 17, where, you know, other players had been offered a 2-year or pro contract afterwards. But something that's pretty common with Declan is he's just always had a great attitude, and that served him really well.
Do you think you see anything different between UK players and Australian players in terms of their attitude?
I think it can be tough and maybe a little bit unfair for Australian players because maybe that motivation is impacted by lack of opportunity. The motivation is really high here in the UK. Enjoyment is really high, but that might be as well because there is a really clear pathway for players to land a professional contract at 17. Whereas that's really difficult for an Australian player.
Professional contract for a 17-year-old in England is life-changing, right? 17-year-old in A-League is getting what they could get if they're working in retail or something as well.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So in terms of, we've sort of skirted around technical side of things a little bit there, and kind of taking them as a given. But if we're looking now at a player that potentially wants to go, is got a possibility of moving up a player pathway, but is in sort of, let's say, 5 years old, very young, still very, very raw to the game. What AJ do you think that player or that parent should be focusing on for that player to land them the best opportunity first? Is it putting them in the backyard and just practicing hitting the ball in top corner?
Yeah, look, at Norwest, we have a thing with our 6s and 7s. I had a meeting with the coaches this year, early on, and I basically just said to them, so in the Hills Association, in our environment, what we want to get out of the kids is we want them to be engaged. We want them to enjoy themselves. And if a little bit of learning happens along the way, then it's fantastic. And they'll probably turn up the next year, because that's the environment in terms of most of the coaches that are on this meeting are in. It's a repeat business type scenario. So if the kids are engaged, they enjoy it, plus there's a little bit of learning along the way, they turn up again next year, which is what, as clubs, we need. If you're a parent and you think your kid's the next Messi, well, what are you teaching them at home? Like, you got to be very careful. Like, do you know the right things to be teaching a 5-year-old? I see some kids, getting taught technique and stuff, and it's like, well, I kick the ball differently to 55 other people, and we all get the ball down to the same area. So what is technique really? Like, it's like golfers and their golf swing. They all can hit the fairway, but they've all got different swings, but the ball still gets to where they need it to. So yeah, a 5-year-old, particularly in the space for people on this meeting, can they enjoy it? Are they engaged in it? And if they're learning along the way, as a coach, you're hitting your mark. As a player, I mean, you want to fall in love with the game as early as possible. So, you have to enjoy it. You have to be engaged, and you still have to learn along the way as well as a player. So they're the 3 big key things that I try and focus on with our sort of 5, 6, 7-year-olds.
Matt, what's the youngest that academy players start in England?
It's under 9s. There is pre-academy, which is under 8s, which clubs are allowed to coordinate briefly before signing under 9s, but under 9s is the first official signing.
So what would Millwall or a similar club look for is their top priority qualities, attributes of an under 9s player?
There's obviously a quite detailed sort of first team philosophy and player characteristics that they will base that on, and look to select players in the academy that try to sort of mirror those technical qualities. But I think it's a bit hard to capture the psychological qualities of some of the youngsters until they're actually in the academy. Things like grit, resilience, and hard work seem to be pretty key for Millwall, and to be fair, across a lot of clubs. So it's just looking for indicators of that in games that show, a player's engagement or desire to work hard and be committed, enjoy what they do.
So a lot of what I'm seeing a pattern, a lot of what we've discussed so far is not actually necessarily the football skills that sort of contribute towards being a football player, which is interesting, right? So as we move through sort of that skill acquisition phase, the primary school sort of age groups, and they're obviously developing their technique and their understanding and enjoyment of the game. Do clubs like Millwall supply much in terms of teaching about determination and the mental side of things?
Yeah, certainly. So there's a sports psychologist that's employed with the club, and that's an avenue for one-on-one group sessions, player-specific sessions. I'm actually part of we're organising a project, it's a mentor type program with our first team players, to actually come down to the academy and have, say, for example, a goalkeeper session on a themed topic, and a defender session, a midfielder session, a captain session. So there's that opportunity for mentoring from our senior players as well.
Yeah, probably something that we could easily replicate in our space as well, right?
Yeah, totally. It is a big ask, but it's an achievable one. It's something that the coaches can do with education. And a lot of that is general life skills for our players. It's resilience building, it's responding to adversity, really applicable skills that players need in life, and that sports and football, really brings forward.
So what would Millwall or someone similar look at for a player to be retained year upon year within that primary school sort of age group? What, obviously, determination and the mental capacities need to be there. That's quite big for a club like that. But what would they maybe say? The reason why you're not good enough is because of what?
Well, I think decision making is a big one. So there's a lot of analysis on a player's awareness, scanning their ability to identify options. And that's sort of a theme that's raised quite often in analysis. And you can see it quite clearly from a video analysis point of view, the options that a player might present. And you can sort of see a player's scanning abilities and whether they're aware of those options around them. And that obviously impacts their performance. So I'd say if I could pick one, it's probably that, the decision making and the scanning. But obviously there's so much to it in terms of their technical and individual tactical decisions, whether that's to beat a player offensively or defensively, and their success in doing so, and their pass completion or not. There's quite a bit of stats on that as well.
Interesting. AJ, if you were running a grading session at Northwest for, say, the under 12s, let's assume that you've got a large group of players, and it's not just a case of we've only got 20 boys, so where do they go? Let's say you've got maybe 100 or so, and you're grading them. What would be the difference between a Div 1 player and a Div 2 player?
Yeah, look, what I'd be looking for, again, as Matthew touched on, most of the players in Div 1, Div 2 area can, in terms of the 4 core skills they need, they basically, not of a similar level, but they're quite close. Most coaches will go, I'll pick the bigger, stronger, fastest kid. I tend to go the opposite way. I actually have a 12s team, and I've got quite a few of them who are still only 10, turning 11, which I'm happy to have. But again, it's, if you want to distinguish, a good player from a better player from a good player, it is that decision-making process. Like, you hear the term "play the way you face" thrown out there quite often, even in the SAP and youth league level, even in senior level. But that's all well and good. But if I scan and my body position is a little bit better, my decision making can be better, and maybe I can play a forward ball rather than backwards or sideways, which happens quite often. So again, decision making: when do I pass? Where do I pass? What side of the body do I pass that to? Do I dribble in this situation? Do I cross? Do I pass? All those types of things come into play when you're looking for trying to distinguish between the kids. But unfortunately, most coaches will just go, oh, he's bigger, stronger, faster. He's not as skilled, but he's bigger, stronger, faster, so we'll pick him anyway, which is a little bit of a shame. But, each to their own, I guess. I put a whole lot more emphasis, even in Div 1, Div 2, I put a whole lot more emphasis on developing rather than winning. It's very easy to win football matches. It's get some big, strong, fast kids and pump it long, flood in behind. but do they learn? No, they don't. Do they develop? Probably not.
Matt, anything to add around the physical side of things for a primary school age player in an academy system?
I think it is a factor. There's no doubt about it. Ideally, you'd like to get a strong physical player that's fast and quick, that has all the right decision-making skills, and that's, that's obviously a target. But at the same time, not to exclude players that maybe have not developed physically yet because of their age, but they may. So it's just trying to. It's quite a difficult balancing act, I think, in identifying that, and that's where I think maybe talent ID can play a bigger part in Australian football because it can help educate coaches and around some of those aspects around biological maturity and whatnot.
You go back to Barcelona back, what was it, 08, 9, 10, under Guardiola, and you have a look at the central midfield three of Barcelona. I mean, apart from Busquets, who is quite tall, he's not fast. So you take that aspect out of him. Iniesta, small in stature. Xavi, small in stature. But as I say to everyone, if you want to take the physicality out of football, then technique will do that. If you're good technically and tactically, the ball moves faster, you can move faster without it. And that beats a physical team every day of the week because they're chasing a ball which moves a lot faster. And if you've got the technical ability, and obviously they got the tactical ability as well, then as you saw what Barcelona did for 3-4 years, they just dominated with three midfielders that weren't fast, weren't strong, weren't big and quick. They were just very technically and tactically very good.
We can even say that about the current Manchester City team, right? Other than the two centre backs and the goalkeeper.
Look at the rest Phil Foden, small.
Yeah. Gundogan, David Silva beforehand, Bernardo Silva, Grealish isn't particularly tall. Jesus is not very tall. It's literally probably the two centre halves, the keeper, and maybe Kyle Walker or something might become one of the tallest players in that team. De Bruyne is not particularly, wouldn't put him as a real athlete around there, would you? But he can definitely run, but he's not going to be super fast. He's not a muscular sort of
same with Liverpool. They got the Matip and Van Dijk, and then everybody else is. You look at that middle three, particularly when not Fabinho, the other bloke in there. What's his name? Thiago, yeah. When he's in there, it's just ball movement. The ball speed is exceptionally quick. It's 1-2 touch, little triangles, and it's all, that ball will move faster than anybody can run.
Definitely. I think a player like Thiago is quite deceptively strong, even though he's not tall. Stature and strength of the ball and his ability to hold off defenders and oncoming opposition is great. So yeah, maybe you don't need to be tall, or definitely don't need to be tall, but there's definitely a component to physical the physical component for players.
Relative strength more than anything, isn't it?
Yeah. We have a look at, there was a period there where a lot of the A-League clubs or even the Socceroos, we converted central defenders into number sixes just for their ball winning ability. So, okay, cool, but there's the other side of it too. What's he going to do with it when he gets it? What decisions is he going to do when he gets it? What's his body shape going to be like? Can he play forward more than backwards?
So as we sort of move out of the primary school age groups, we move into the high school age groups and look at sort of 11v11. What possibly, Matt, would change from an academy setting in requirement of a player for 11v11 teenage year groups versus primary school?
Well, I don't think too much changes in terms of individual development. I think maybe that's sort of a bit of a gap between Australian football and the UK in terms of that age group, is that there seems to be a bit more of a focus on the tactical game at that age, or, the 11v11, but there still needs to be quite a strong focus on individual player specific development and the skills required for those positions in that 11v11 to make the tactics of the team come to life. So I think there's quite a strong focus still on that individual element in the 11v11.
So do they run sessions that are just centre-back sessions or defensive sessions rather than always being with your team?
There'll be components within a session, for example, that will have player-specific targets. So, yeah.
I'm assuming they've got well-planned out sessions with a number of assistant coaches that they can then break out into groups of 3 or 4, which too many people listen to this will go, oh, I wish I had one assistant coach, let alone possibly 2 or 3 or 4.
Yeah, and that's a challenge with resources. I mean, we've got phase lead coaches here within academies, and then sort of assistant coaches that will oversee teams, and the phase lead coach might still oversee a team. But you're right, there's usually at least 2 coaches per team. But to be fair, with 2 coaches, it still happens. Just
a bit of creativity, right? Bit of planning.
And planning, like you say, yeah.
AJ, what would possibly change in your space then, looking at grading, or what would constitute a Div 1 player, or possibly even a player that might go into an NPL environment, Football New South Wales competition? What might you see change in that environment?
Yeah, obviously they've got to have, once they get to that 11v11 aspect, they've got to have an understanding of their position. Whether it be they play multiple positions, but you've got to be a little bit more position specific with what they are. You find most of the time in association football, the Division 1 and 2 teams have basically just been kids that have either gone to school together, or they've grown up together, or they've just been graded the same, almost, maybe 80% of the squad's the same in the under 14s of what it was in the under 12s, or it's the same in the 17s as what it was in the 15s. But if you're wanting to take that extra step into the youth league area, again, you've got to have that sound core skills. Your technique's got to be good. Tactically, you've got to be quite sound, and we've got a limited opportunity. There's so many kids that play, but there's only a few spots. There's only 40 odd clubs that have youth league, so there's still a lot of kids that play in that area. But you must have you got to have the basics. They've got to be sound. You've got to have a good first touch. Your passing's got to be good, decision making. And again, it comes down to those age groups. Coaches are not forced to, but they're told go for the wins. So what do? They pick big, strong, fast kids.
Do you think that's necessarily clubs telling them, or technical directors telling them, or do you think that is?
It's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of. I think there are some clubs out there that do that. There's also pressure from parents who. Here's the difference between us and academies overseas is they don't pay anything, whereas we charge kids a lot of money. So then there's the expectation from parents. Well, I'm paying a lot of money. Our team's losing quite consistently. So what are we paying for? So then the coach has got to go, oh, well, I've got to go for wins because otherwise I might be out of a job. I've got pressure from the parents. I may or may not have pressure from the club. And it's also a little bit, which is a bit of a wrong stigma to have. People tend to judge whether or not a coach is good by his win-loss record. There's a lot of different circumstances why, someone's win-loss record might be good or bad, but doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad coach just because you've had a losing season. You might not have the resources. You might have only had 30 kids come down to trial, whereas the bigger clubs had 100. So obviously they can pick better kids because the talent pool's bigger. But yeah, so there's a few areas there that put a little bit of pressure on everything.
Where do you think, AJ, winning as becomes the primary focus, or should become that? What sort of age group?
I'd probably go closer towards 16, 17, 18.
Matt, what's your thoughts on that one?
It's a really interesting question, because here in the UK, there aren't tables for under 16s and below. Whereas
we'll bring that into Hills football next year.
It's I was a little bit surprised by it, to be honest, but I get it now. Whilst being here, that the focus for academies is purely player development, and in every game I've seen, players want to win anyway. That's not going to change, but it really highlights the focus on individual development. They do start to have tables that are under 18s, but again, the emphasis is still on development to get players into pro contracts for the under 23s. And I think that's where maybe it's a little bit more focused on results and preparing for the first team. But tables aren't kept until 18s.
I would love to see us abolish final series, because I think that becomes, depending on how it's set up, but in a lot of divisions, you can end up with having a mediocre season, finishing in 6th place and qualify for finals, and then you just play ugly football and win a competition and suddenly you're brilliant, right?
Well, kids will still give you the same type of effort, the same type of commitment, whether there is a competition table or not, because at the end of the day, they want to win games and they want to do well on that. So if we remove a competition table, do you think kids are going to turn up to training less or not put in as much? I don't think they will. And then if you take it away, well, then it does just purely become about the development of the kid. And if you're a smart enough person, if you play 30 games and you won 22 of them, well, you're going to be near the top somewhere. If you only win 6, well, you're going to be down near the bottom. If you win 12, well, you'll be mid-table. That's how it works. Like, you can judge it yourself. But yeah, I don't think just because there's a competition table means that kids are putting in any extra effort. So, why are we having a competition table? Well, is it for the kids? Is it for the parents, clubs, the association? I don't know.
Do we possibly add more pressure on the player at 14, 15 when they can see a table?
Yeah, there's more pressure on players, more pressure on clubs, more pressure on coaches. Again, over in England, as Matthew said, the sole purpose is to develop players for the first team, because it's cheaper than going and spending 30 million on a player. You're not going to spend $30 million, even if you get a kid in at 9 and keep him until your first grade. You haven't spent 30 million on him. So it's cheaper to develop your own than buy. Whereas we don't have that luxury over here, because, there's promotion relegation for youth league. So it starts at, although youth league's 13s, the club championship starts at 14s. So there's a lot of pressure on kids, then pressure on coaches. And it's like, well, I think a lot more development could be had. And then does that breed then into we're producing better players for, it might be your MPL club, or it could be your A-League club, or are we breeding better players to go overseas, better players to eventually hit our Olympic and Socceroos in our junior Matildas and our Matildas? Well, I think it would.
Matt, how does it work in relation to promotion relegation or going up a division for an academy side in the UK?
Yeah, so it's a good point that AJ brought up around the pressures on players, whereas the emphasis and focus here is on development for clubs. And if clubs develop, then their players are going to develop, and it's what they provide for their players. So each club or academy is tiered based on the rules and regulations and standards that the FA set out. And if they meet those standards, then they can justify going up a tier. So basically, it just puts the onus back on clubs in terms of their service. I think the risk with having tables is that the focus is shifted away from player development. But here, it's like I say, it's really sort of centered on that in all aspects.
So what would one of the criteria be? Would it be something like coaching accreditation, or how many players have progressed into their first team or something?
It'd be around sort of program guidelines. So, for example, having positions in place that are needed for the academy, like a full-time physiotherapist, a full-time safeguarding officer, a full-time head of football, a certain amount of full-time phase lead coaches, facilities, at like synthetic pitch, an indoor weather facility. I think that's, don't quote me on it, I think that maybe for tier 1. So there's the different standards, obviously throughout the tiers, and tier 1 is where you find most of your Premier League clubs and some other clubs obviously as well. But yeah, they're really quite strict around that, which is a good thing.
Different method to how we do things over here. So in the NPL system, it's got to be your little 14, 15-year-olds have to get you points to go up. And then in the association space, clubs, you look at this group of players and then somehow pluck a number of what division they should play in, and then we'll start playing some games. And if they're winning quite well or losing too much, then we'll look to rejuggle them around.
Totally.
Interesting. So what then, if we've spoken about sort of teenage year groups and we look at under 17s, under 18s is roughly where winning becomes the predominant factor, what then will constitute, or what gives a player the opportunity to get a professional contract around that 18, 19? Why would a player get let go? Why would a player get offered a contract? What sort of characteristics do they show greater than someone else?
Well, I think it does center around performance and a player's ability, but obviously there is the other elements to a player's development and their attitude, their psychological development, their social development, and those factors are going to come into play. Obviously, it's pretty tough when it gets to that stage because it can be quite subjective, and there are a lot of opinions from a lot of members of staff, a lot of coaching input, and then obviously availability of contracts as well for the 23s, and you come into sort of the budgeting area there as well. But generally, a good benchmark is if you've got 50% of your second year scholars or your apprentices in your under 18s that qualify for a pro contract, that you've done really well. That might be 5 players, but there's also a massive sort of safety net as well for the higher tier academies for players that don't land that pro contract in the under 23s, that they've got tier 3 or tier 4 base clubs that they might be able to play in and land a pro contract there in the lower tiers of English football.
So we've sort of mentioned around technical development basically continues throughout our learning. In Australia, we have a big focus on that in your SAP age groups. And then once you get into 11v11, whether it's designed or not, the ego and the win sort of takes hold on things. In terms of tactical development, Matt, what would be your thoughts on the predominant age groups to start teaching formation, shape, strategy?
I think when you look at sort of the skill acquisition phase in Australia, that's really a phase that needs some basic structure and not a lot of attention at all to sort of any tactical input. It's more allowing players to have freedom to make mistakes and being okay with players making mistakes, because that's part of their learning, putting them in situations where individually they can tactically improve. It's not just about the team. And then I think that's going to carry on into the 11v11, where maybe that's where the tactical focus for the team starts to get a little bit more dominant, but there's still a focus for individual tactical development. So it's almost like it's it's been layered but added as the player gets older, as opposed to substituted, if that makes sense.
Yep. AJ, do you think we go into the tactical side too early from what you see in Australia and Sydney?
All depends. Like this, as we said, the big difference between us and obviously the academies in England is they are purely on development, where I've got parents that come and speak to me and say that their kid's in SAP, but they're losing every week, you know, and they say, oh, they need to get rid of the coach, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, there's no table. Who cares if you're losing every week? Is your kid improving? That should be your marker, not are we winning games in 9-10. So it should be back to, is your kid learning? Are they developing those skills? Are they developing their awareness of the game? In terms of sort of tactical ability in the association level, again, it comes like, as a coach, if you don't know it, don't coach it. That's a really big thing that both you and I on mini roos and skill trainers and even the game training, you preach to coaches, if you don't know it, don't coach it. Like, just only coach to your audience and what you know and what your kids can and can't do. But in terms of tactical stuff, I've got a under 10 Division 1 side. I've done, in the 3 years I've had them, I've done maybe 2 half sessions on defending. Everything else is about players on the ball scoring goals. And all I've done really is basically showed them, if the ball's on one side, whoever's on the far side, tuck in. When it shifts over, we all shift over, and can we press? And when I say press, I just mean, can we get the ball back quickly? That's it. Just run around as fast as you can to get the ball back so we can play with it. So not a lot of tactical stuff, but, again, it comes down to, in the SAP environment, can we do it there? If you've got really intelligent players, maybe you can start introduce things in your sessions. You could probably, depending on the type of coach and the players you've got, you could probably do a heck of a lot of tactical stuff through hidden learning. So yeah, don't know.
I guess there's also a large element of knowing your audience. If you're trying to do a plan out the back session, but your goalkeeper struggles to kick it far enough to get the ball outside the box, you've probably got a bigger issue to deal with, right? If they technically can't complete the actions, which is an issue for grassroots. Well, not an issue for grassroots, but that's a reason why there's so many different divisions, because players are at different skill level, and you're playing on a big field at 13, 14. There's a very real chance some of your players can't kick that far, but yet we want to have them high and wide and spread out, or you want to play long ball. Well, actually, can they kick it that far? So then the only one that can kick it ends up becoming your centre back, because they're the only one that can clear it 30 metres. Interesting. Lots of, and I guess, each to their own as well, right? As long as you're teaching something to your players, hopefully that's going in, you're still making them better. If you're doing tactics, hopefully they're still kicking a ball in order to achieve those tactical stuff as well. Australian players are typically, or Australian culture likes to sort of pride themselves on having athletes that are physically capable. When you look at players in the past from the golden generation, your Cahills and your Emertons and Swartzes and stuff that were very physically capable. Is that still a positive of Australian football? What's our thoughts there?
I think so. I think it's an element of football. Like AJ said previously, you can't take the physicality out of the game. So it does need attention, I think. And here in the UK, it does have attention as well. So I know it's a lot of academies, they will have athletic development as part of their program. in under nines, and that just might be playing multi-sports before a training session, or focusing on agility, speed relays. So I think there's definitely an element of that that's still part of the game, and I think that's something that Australia's always had. I think it's important not to steer away from that, from a strength.
So when we've got potentially a grassroots coach that's got 1 hour a week, where should that sort of come in as a priority list or an age group? Where should we really start to consider, maybe I should do some running with these players, maybe I should do some push-ups with these players?
Yeah, that's the challenge when you've got limited time and you've got to prioritize what to do in that 1 hour. But you can also be creative around that 1 hour. It might mean coming to training, if possible, 10 minutes earlier, and then doing that, making that 1 hour session an hour and 10 minutes, or having it optional for players that do come early to do that work prior to the session commencing. But you're right, you've got to prioritize that, I think, with your technique and your skill development.
AJ, in terms of fitness of players at grassroots level, where should that become a priority and a consideration for a coach?
In association level, it's kind of difficult. At the end of the day, kids will still, they go to school, they run around at recess, they run around at lunch, they go home, they run around, they come to soccer training, they run around, and they've got 5 days at school where they run around. They might play sport, one afternoon, then they might play PWSA. So they're doing they might have another sport that they train for. So they're doing a lot of things anyway. So I think, most kids are, for lack of a better word, fit. Are they football fit? No, they're probably not. There's a big difference. I do no fitness work whatsoever in any of my sessions, in terms of, the old doggies, we start at this line, run to that line, come back, run to the next line. All my sessions, all my fitness are game-related fitness. The ball's always in play. The players are always moving. As a coach, we tell coaches, you control the tempo of your session, have all your stuff ready. When you're playing small little games, you throw a ball in up here, now you throw a ball down there. They've got to transition quick. There's your fitness. I've got a big rule. I do not want to see kids running laps. That's absolutely outlawed at Norwest. There's no running laps. No kid learns a single thing doing that. So everything that you want to do fitness-wise should be with a ball in your session. But as I said, I've got kids that play soccer on Saturday, play AFL Sunday, or rugby league on Sunday. They train for those sports during the week. They do swimming. They play sport at school. They go over to kids' house. So how much do we want to give them? And as you said, we've only got community space. We've only got an hour with these kids. Do we really want to spend the hour that we have? Do we want to spend 10 minutes without the ball? Well, no.
It's a huge strength, I think, in Australia, that there's so much opportunity to play so many different sports. And I think if that's happening naturally, then that's probably the ideal situation. I know there's clubs like Ajax, for example, that will have players come down to training, and they'll have play equipment set up at the training ground for the under 9s and 10s to play on before the session, as a way of trying to create sort of a playful environment and let kids be kids and have that sort of physical development in other ways in a playful aspect. And then other clubs like Leicester will have a sand pitch for players to come and play on prior to session. But again, when you're looking at grassroots in that limited time, you're right. I think it's about prioritizing what you can do in that hour with the ball, and hoping that players will have other opportunities outside of football to have multi-sport.
We're nearly at the end of our session. We've sort of just got one or two areas to hit left for this evening. So my next one, we've talked a lot about the mental, the physical, the technical, the tactical. What about the behavioural side of things? What about them as people? What about education? So, Matt, I'll start with you, being that you've got a lot more tools and resources available to you. But what's sort of in the academy space? How much time and attention to detail do they take around player behaviour, schoolwork, and that sort of stuff?
It's enormous. We've got a head of education at the academy that is a reference point for all children, 9s to 18s, or that are at school, that will liaise with schools if there are any behavioural issues, so that the children know that there are potential ramifications, or the club will be involved to try and support schools and the players and the families if there are situations that need to be addressed. There's obviously high standards that the academy tries to set, or academies try to set, I think, to prepare players around sort of punctuality, training, attendance. And as you go up the age groups into that sort of under 18s, under 16s, apprenticeships that are full-time, they have a program for life skills where external organizations will come in and deliver courses on well-being, post-football life, and just educate players around general life skills. There's obviously embedded psychology program, sports psychology for attributes like resilience and overcoming adversity. But certainly there's a culture, I think, at all clubs that I've seen, that they try to teach players to be good people and not just good players. And I think that's sort of key to success, that you hear a lot of players that they do make it, they've all got a good attitude. And even though they weren't the best in their cohort in their team, they've still managed to be professional players, whereas others that were better than them at the time haven't.
How does Norwest tackle that in some way? Because obviously, being a community club, you don't have a teacher liaison officer or anything like that. But Norwest is definitely a club that you can see from a Hills football perspective that has a culture, and some of the squads in particular seem to have a togetherness. Anything you've noticed there, AJ?
Yeah, well, a lot of them at Norwest are essentially school groups, friendship groups. So, they're playing football with their mates, and they come back year in, year out, and just say, I just want to play with my mates, which is fantastic. That's what we want. So there's the sort of the family aspect of being a family club. They're all playing with their friends, they're playing with cousins, they're playing with school friends, which is fantastic. In terms of my teams that are like in Div 1 and stuff, we only train one night a week. I think most of them in Div 1 train 2, sometimes 3 nights a week. But I tell them if they need to miss training because they haven't done their schoolwork, or you've got a family dinner on, or there's a birthday party they want to go to that. At the end of the day, even though they're Div 1 kids, it's still community sport. It's not like, we're a professional outfit. They're doing this for enjoyment or whatever reason it may be, but school's more important, family's more important. And then if you can make football, fantastic. But, if something clashes with, I've got something on at school, do that. Got a birthday for my younger sister that I got to attend that. Oh, I've got a family dinner next weekend, I can't play. No problems, enjoy your dinner.
Matt, how many players in an academy space would you see go on holiday across the season, miss a week of training or a game?
not many. But again, I think it's a different environment, and it's a full-time environment essentially for these players. But in saying that, they're human. They've all got families, and if something does arise, then the players will miss training. That's how life is. So it's not uncommon at the same time for players to miss a session. But generally, the attendance is really important.
How is the club around players missing things for like a birthday?
Yeah, I don't think it would happen, and I don't think the players would want to miss a session for a birthday. So yeah, I think it's not really a problem from what I gather, because the players they really want to be there. They really want to become pros. They've invested so much time and energy, and to get to a tier 1 and tier 2 academy. The high competition there is in London, it's a really massive achievement as it is, and players and families just want to make the most of that experience. I suppose it's something similar to being at like a Sydney FC or a Western Sydney Wanderers academy, and trying to make the most of that experience.
And then I imagine things like got a school presentation or something that then takes the opportunity for they might miss a session. But there's a bigger carrot at the end of the program in comparison to what most players in the New South Wales system really have at the end of what the tunnel is, right?
Totally. But at the same time, there's skills to be learned by having those conversations with children and young people around time management. I think that's a life skill in itself. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that players who are academically inclined also happen to be better performing athletes, and vice versa. Better performing athletes happen to be better performing academically at school. So a little bit of that is around education for players and parents as well, and trying to maximize the potential of young people.
It does surprise me sometimes when I get players saying, it's my HSC year, I'm going to take a year off football, I'm just going to do my study, and go, well, okay, but when you get home from school at 4 o'clock, are you telling me you're going to do nothing but study from 4 o'clock until 9 o'clock? And you couldn't potentially be a little bit more proactive with your time and study 4 o'clock until 6:30, and then you're ready to go training 7:30 till 9, and you could lose an hour and a half just twice a week. Oh no, I can't play that level because I've got to do HSC. I can't see too many 18-year-olds that are then sitting their nose in the book for another 4 or 5 hours every night.
Yeah.
Ask them to lose the PlayStation or the Xbox. Okay, well, that wraps me up for all of my questions. We sort of covered the technical, the tactical, the physiological, different stages within players, age groups, and then as well as the social and the educational side of players just at the end here, with really different insight between grassroots football and academy football, English football and Australian Sydney, New South Wales based football. But there are a lot of similarities, right? And the biggest difference probably really is the environment that they are in will take up the level and the skill level and the interest and the level of detail that's either put on them or they will deliver themselves. And I think one of the things that coaches can take away from this is knowing your audience, knowing where you're at, knowing the bigger picture, and hopefully for our general Hills football audience that the under 13s or the under 14s premiership and grand final are probably not the most important and be all and end all, but giving everyone a good opportunity to play minutes, play in a different position, potentially that weakest player that might cost you a game still needs to get some game time, and who knows in a couple of years' time that they might not become the best player in the team. So I thank AJ and Matt in particular for donating their time, coming on this evening for us and this morning for Matt. And thank you for everyone else that has registered and come along to this this evening, and for those that are watching it as a recording at a later date, thank you very much. Hopefully you've taken away something from this event and something that you can take into your coaching down the track.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.